good afternoon and welcome to our Unearthing programme. My name is Lavinia and I am the founder of the M Word. And my colleague today is Sue, our lovely Sue, who is our part-time researcher and one of the best assets we've certainly had the pleasure of employing in our company. So today we are going to be talking about masking, and Sue, as ever, there is just loads of information. So take it away, Sue. What would you like to tell us today about masking?
Yeah, so first off, caveat, this has been a bit of a sideline passion project of mine for a while now, I think, regardless of unearthing. It's been something that I've really found interesting as a topic and very, very personal, really personal, because I accept and acknowledge now that I'm very good at masking and have been for most of my life. And so this has caused an awful lot of introspection and reflecting through my life, as well as doing all of the research. So it's been interesting, and there's so much to talk about. And I ended up buying a book. Much to my child's dismay. He said, "Mum, why on earth do you want to read something like that?" And it's called Autism and Masking. It was recently published by Dr. Felicity Sedgewick, Dr. Lorna Wing, and Helen Ellis. And it has been really fascinating reading for me. And I have highlighted so much from it, which I will try and dig into a little bit today, as well as looking at other articles. But this book has managed to encapsulate the theories and the research so far into what we now call autistic masking. And it has been on the radar of psychologists and psychiatrists and pediatricians. However, it's not been fully understood, and it is so complex as to how somebody masks in the first place. It's so individual, and it's been something of a quandary as well, you know, in how to truly measure and understand it. So the first person to produce a book on it in the mainstream media was Leanne Holiday Wiley, and her book first came out in 1999, and it was called Pretending to be Normal. And in this, she talked about her diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, as it was called then, and how she realized, looking back through her life, that she pretended to be something that she wasn't.
Right.
And that what she thought was normal was about her own perceptions of what is normal, and that she really wanted to be like everybody else. She wanted to fit in, but on the inside didn't feel like she fitted in. And this was the first truly authentic voice of an autistic woman and girl in the world. And so this is still mentioned today, you know, as one of those groundbreaking books. And it is a good read. I mean, I've dipped into it. And it says in one of her quotes, "I mentally recorded the way that people use their eyes, how they would open them wide when they spoke loud and animated, or how they would cast them downwards if they spoke quietly or slowly." And she developed a purposeful and practiced rehearsal of facial expressions. And so this, you know, this triggered something in me. And I thought, yes, I remember when I was a teenager sitting in front of the mirror and practicing different expressions. And I didn't know that that wasn't, you know, what every teenage girl in the country was doing. I certainly didn't talk about it. It was very much in the privacy of my bedroom. And I would pretend conversations as well, and I would plan conversations. So this book was, like I said, you know, groundbreaking for the time. And in the research world, in the academic world, we had Lorna Wing, and Lorna Wing passed away a few years back now, but devoted her life to autism, and her daughter was autistic, and she herself identified with autism, and she has done, you know, a phenomenal amount. And her theory of camouflaging hypothesis, as it was called, was also groundbreaking. And she was the first person, the first academic, the first psychologist to recognize that there were autistic females who relied on camouflaging socially. And it was used then as a word, as a thing, camouflaging.
So are you suggesting then that camouflaging has been around since 1999, or is that a new in vogue word phrase now? Where are we with the history around camouflaging?
Yeah, so this was in 1981.
Oh, even older.
1981, and yeah, she did a paper. I think I haven't actually read that paper, but I know that it's been reported upon.
Right.
And she acknowledged that it was something that affected those with Asperger's diagnosis. And she also was the first person to use Asperger syndrome as a name. She didn't invent Asperger's because that was Hans Asperger all those years back. But she created the syndrome name for it. And it was a case of recognizing that autistic girls, as she saw it, didn't meet the criteria for autism in the traditional ADOS, which is the autism assessment that I'm sure many parents now are really familiar of, because it's still used today to help diagnose autism in children, that they weren't quite ticking the boxes, and that it was probable that they were masking in the process. So yeah, she obviously went on to do phenomenal things in the autism world.
Do you wish me to go on to the next slide?
Yes.
Right, here we go. So this one is identifying different types of masking then, and we've already now mentioned two words, masking and camouflaging. So I'm assuming there's more information on at least both of those, but presumably there is also more words coming out to describe, is there?
Well, this is the thing about masking, is that, you know, we all have traits of masking. All humans can mask. There is the classic one of a woman getting ready for work, puts her makeup on, puts her outfit on, ready for work, to portray that professional person. So in a way, that's masking. But there is also compensation, which is when in a social situation, there might be a bit of adjusting that somebody would do. And you don't have to be autistic to do that either. You know, that can affect anybody.
Right.
For example, a shy person, an introverted person who is having to socialize, perhaps at a dinner party, they would make compensations for their shyness by making an effort to have a conversation when perhaps they don't want to, or just giving a bit more of themselves, you know, making more of who they are for that situation. So it's very situational. But
so would that look like then, if so, I can think of an example for myself, in that if, for example, we went to a party, because I was so shy, I would busy myself with trying to help out with the food on the table, so that I was looking as if I was part of it, not having to engage with that, but, you know, trying to somehow compensate for not being able to speak to other people other than, you know, here's some food, here's some drinks, can, you know, if you need it, I'll get it. Is that kind of the same?
Absolutely.
I got you.
When I was a teacher, I had some wonderful pupils in my classes over the years. And I remember one particular lovely little girl who was painfully shy. And her compensation would be to always tidy up and put the pencils out on the table and things like that. And she would often come up to me just before break, because, you know, perhaps she didn't want to go out and play. Is there anything I can help you with? You know, can I stay in? And so that's a little compensation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but masking for an autistic person is a whole other level. And
right.
I didn't realize to the extent that there are different types of masking. So there's what's called instinctive, which is when there perhaps has been a very stigmatizing event. Like, say something embarrassing happened at school, and all your peers, all the friends in the class started to laugh at you or take the mickey to mock you. An instinctive masking of that would be the subsequent day or weeks or however long, you know, afterwards, that they would try and not do what it was that was stigmatizing. So perhaps it was because, you know, they were a little bit goofy, perhaps too physical. You know, we know with ADHD combined with autism that it's highly likely that, you know, there can be a lot more outward expression of energy. So instinctive masking in that scenario of entering a classroom, for example, would be, okay, I need to sit still, I need to sit down, I need to not fidget, I need to not make my noises, you know, if they're perhaps echolalia is an issue, you know, okay, stop myself from making these noises, don't draw attention to myself. So that's instinctive masking. And that is something that sort of happens over time because of a traumatic event, invariably. So there's a history there. If a professional was to dig in and think, you know, why is this person doing this masking? It could be related to a particular event. Then there's what's called subconscious masking. So perhaps a child at school has been reprimanded by a teacher for some sort of unwanted behavior, or they've been so distressed in the supermarket, they've had a complete meltdown in public. And then got a negative reaction. That can lead to subconscious masking, because that has been very much a felt experience of trauma in the body. And, you know, the body keeps the score. And so in order to try and stop that again from happening, a person can cover that up. Then there is the social aspect to masking, which can be called ingrained, whereby a person learns to inhibit the natural behaviors and think of social expectations. So to think, you know, according to whatever social situation it is, this is how I should behave. And it could be that they've done a lot of research into that. It could be that they've done a lot of observing and mimicking of friends and people around them. Sometimes as well, television and media and books can be helpful for that. So So they end up building up, the person could end up having a repertoire of go-to things to fall back on.
Yeah.
You know, in a particular situation. And there can also be conscious masking as well, which is when there's an active recognition of a current situation not being comfortable. And so then the person might not feel safe, and it will require completely suppressing the autistic self. Some people might refer to it as suppression of natural behaviours, and that can alter according to the person's personality and characteristics, and also can be influenced by other neurodivergence, gender, sexuality.
So, but if we're suppressing, then the chances are the minute we start doing that, we're presumably going to increase our anxieties, aren't we?
Oh,
we're not being ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, if you were mimicking somebody else, you know, trying to fit into a conversation or a group, surely the anxiety is going to be, am I doing it right? To the point that you're almost missing out on the content of the, you know, information or communication, however you want to word it. But that's going to add even more anxiety, surely.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why people talk about the great cost of masking and the long-term effects of masking, which we will come to. But it is something that autistic advocates talk of time and time again, in how it is a great personal, it takes a great personal toll to maintain the mask.
Yeah, because you're so busy acting out something that's not you for such a long period of time. And even if a conversation is 2 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour and a half, that needing to mask is a long time for the anxiety to be, you know, going round and round and round in your body, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is why it's so challenging for autistic young people at school to manage that daily.
Is this thinking about reasons for masking then?
Yeah, we can move on to the reasons.
If you're talking about school, I'm guessing that's going to be one of them.
Yes, and I've just realised I've misplaced my card. So yeah, I know. I've got so many notes. All my notes for reasons have. Bear with me.
It's okay.
I've put my card somewhere in my book.
Oh no. The book has gobbled it up.
Oh, this is typical, isn't it? I feel like I'm so super organized, but no, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, reasons can be. I can't find it, Lavinia.
I'm just thinking about if you were in school, and right now we talk about masking, don't we? We don't say that somebody's suppressing themselves throughout the day, the school day. What we do know is that it's like a Coke bottle effect, don't we? A fizzy bottle effect, in that quite often the young people come out and explode, or will sit in a car and rock, or will just cry and shut down, not able to do anything. So we can, but I guess again, that's very observable, isn't it? Whereas masking isn't observable, because, you know, they're doing the blending in with the wallpaper, the ground, you know. It's a very difficult situation for staff members in the school environment to kind of see that it's obviously masking, but
Absolutely.
what we do see is the ricochet from that.
Yeah, I mean, in this book, it's called the 4 o'clock time bomb, which is when parents have reported that their child comes home and either has a very rapid and dramatic meltdown as soon as they enter the front door, or they completely shut off into their bedroom, never to be spoken to again for the next however many hours, that there is this noticeable difference between the young person at school and at home. And parents can really struggle in how to deal with that. And if parents can struggle with it, certainly the teachers can, you know, when they've got an awful lot of pupils to be concentrating on. But the reasons for it is because school, more often than not, is a very stressful, sensory overloading environment for an autistic young person. And so they might not feel safe. And that is a massive motivator to the autistic person to keep themselves safe at all costs. That is an instinctive response, is to how can I protect myself in this situation? So that is one. Avoiding stigma is another big one. Stigma is totally embroiled in masking. It's intertwined in so many ways, and that is because the neurotypical society has an image or a perception of what an autistic person, or who an autistic person is, what they should look like, and the stigma comes from that very negative, deficit-based perception of autism. And so that is a big motivator to avoid any sort of attention being drawn on themselves.
But if we're talking about girls who are generally not screened for autism until secondary school, and you're thinking about the individual girls, and I'm labouring this point, but I know from our regular audits from the M Word, it's not so cut and dried. It's not all girls. But if you are not aware that you are autistic and nobody else around you believes you are autistic, because you are masking so well, you know, I say to some of my clients, you have got an A-star Oscar for the amount of acting that you are doing. Internally, that must be extremely stressful, because the one thing you don't want is to be pulled out as being different. So there is something going on there, isn't there, when you think about, you know, not everybody is aware that there is autism, shall we say, in the room, but something's not right. But the last thing they ever want is to draw attention to themselves.
Absolutely. And it's also about succeeding in that environment. Every child wants to succeed at school. Every parent wants their child to succeed at school. So there's this huge expectation that school is a place where you must strive to succeed. So that is a massive factor for masking at school, certainly. And that can affect adults in the workplace as well. You know, it's not just school. We all have a drive to do well in our jobs, in our work, in our study. You know, students under incredible pressure to get deadlines done, they want to give of their best. So there is an element of that's pressure from that environment. There's also a huge element, especially for children and teenagers, of fitting in. The need to fit in is just innate in human beings. We are social creatures. We all want to have our little friendship groups. You know, we all want to have somebody to stand beside, to be with, to not be alone necessarily. I mean, yes, okay, there are some autistic advocates who will say they like their periods of solitude, but invariably children on that playground every break time want to be with some companions. So the need to fit in is crucial. The need for
can we just go a bit further with that, because I'm just thinking of I've got a handful of clients over the last 6 months who have really struggled with their mental ill health, and it's not only just about fitting in. So that's one problem, but on the other side of it is, what if I have no friends? What then? And that fear constantly drives them to try and fit in. But do you remember I was saying to you a few seconds ago about that awful pressure of anxiety, you know, just going round and round the system? If you've got one pressure of trying to fit in, but you've got a driver of anxiety about, if you don't have any friends, what then? It's that horrible pit of, I'm not going to survive. It's a whole, you know, the whole drive about anxiety, isn't it? It's about fight or flight, isn't it? So if you've got that driver, that's going to make things a double whammy.
Yes, I mean, this is a huge risk of vulnerability that a person can fawn. I mean, fawning is not talked about as much as it should be, in my opinion. We all seem to be very quick to talk about a stress response as being fight or flight. There is also the freeze. There is also the fawn, and the fawner, the person who innately wants to please, will present as someone who is perhaps, you know, say in a group of friends, is always going to be the one making the compliments. Oh, I really like your hair. Oh, where did you get those boots? And they might even change the way that they're dressing to fit in with that particular person that they've, you know, latched onto, that they've decided they want to be friends with.
We talked about this yesterday as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
I remember, because I was relaying a situation when I was about 10 or 11 in my French class, and Miss Cunningham from France, of course, married an Englishman. She had the most gorgeous shoes on, and I was so terrified that she would pick on me yet again for my handwriting. Somehow I managed to get the courage to compliment her on her shoes. And I remember not looking at her directly, but more about the shoes, absolutely quaking. And she clearly was delighted that somebody had noticed her shoes, but she took it as an opportunity to have another go at me. You know, has your handwriting improved? It's such a nightmare. You know, and that was me crushed again, you know, that there was no way. And I thought, I'll never do that again, because, you know, it'd taken all my courage to kind of to compliment her in a desperate bid to be pleasing and not an issue, you know, for, you know, my nightmarish handwriting. The irony now is, if Miss Cunningham was around and looked at my handwriting, too many people complimented me for my handwriting. But in that time era, it was definitely her worst nightmare. But that level of anxiety was so intense.
Yes, I mean, I really recollect and resonate with this element of fawning myself. I am a people pleaser. It's only in my latter years that I realised to what extent I always put other people's priorities first, to the detriment of my own, and that can lead ultimately to complete self-neglect. You know, if you think of teenage girls who really feel desperate to have a friend, just one friend, and they're not sure who that person is, then whoever they sidle up to or sit next to in lessons or hang out with at break times, they're going to do everything in their power to make that person feel good about themselves, to the expense of their own lacking self-esteem, because it just doesn't come naturally to conflate, to big yourself up. You know, when you're socially awkward as we know an awful lot of autistic people are, that, you know, that there is this immediate internalizing response of, you know, I'm not good enough to be their friend. I'm not good enough to be the best pupil in this class for my teacher. I'm, you know, it is that self-talk that has to be suppressed, and that in time really leads to erosion of self-confidence and self-esteem, and total loss of identity, which is, you know, really, really detrimental.
And just going on from that as well, and I think it's more common with girls, in my clinical experience, I would stress, in that girls invariably start taking on other ideas of how do I fit in. So, for example, they will compare themselves physically, and if they're not the same built frame, they will try to address that with suppressing their appetites, you know, reducing their diet. And one of my last CAMS clients very much was distraught, you know, at how do I fit in. And the reason why she was so distraught was because she had recognized that if I didn't have this small group of friends, I would have nobody. And it's better to have somebody than nobody. But in order to be part of this group, I need to be like them, you know, have my hair like them, like wear makeup like them, like say things are boring or crap, or, you know, so the language is having to be utilized. And of course, this self-harming, because invariably you are networking with a group of other people, other individuals who are feeling just like you. There's that common sort of understanding. And so the self-harming becomes part of that behavior, or the eating disorders become part of that behavior. I mean, it's really quite a sort of like an iceberg situation, isn't it? Where you're just like, I just don't fit in, and I get that I don't fit in, but I don't know why I don't fit in, and what am I not doing? What am I not saying? And all this pressure just becomes this horrible vacuum packed with low self-esteem and almost self-loathing in many respects, isn't it? And yet, under that umbrella of masking and fawning is quite disturbing, isn't it, when you think about how much is missed in school?
Absolutely. Because to a teacher observing perhaps you know, behavior on the playground, they might see that there's the smiles and, you know, a person not on their own, they're in and amongst a group. You know, a group of boys might be side to side, seemingly, you know, all getting along. But that one autistic person might well be thinking, you know, I've got to just hang in here. You know, they might be counting every minute of that playtime to think, you know, okay, when can I get back into lesson? Because they're so stressed of, and so it's about hypervigilance, I think. I mean, this is what really resonated for me, is that you are socially hypervigilant, and you're trying to preempt and foresee every potential conversation. Perhaps less so for boys, because we do know that girls will try and socially camouflage, or have the drive to socially camouflage more. Boys can sort of be more doers, and, you know, kick a football about, that's distracting. And so, you know, I'll join in and kick a football about. I certainly know of children that have said, you know, I tried to fit in with that particular group because they were the sporty group. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll like, you know, playing basketball or football at playtime. And so they go and do it, but actually they don't like it. And end up, you know, walking away, and then they're suddenly exposed and alone again because they don't want to do that. It is a complex matter of that individual person choosing, sometimes choosing how to invest their time and energy in order to fit in or fulfill an expectation, you know, whether that expectation is as a friend or as a pupil or as a colleague. And it takes an awful lot of input. And this is why, you know, on the surface, I liken it to the swan. You know, that the swan is gliding along seemingly effortlessly, but underneath the surface of the water, the feet are going 10 to the dozen.
Quite.
And so it's like that in the brain, in the autistic brain. And it requires so much work, you know, so much practice.
Should we have a look at the research then? Because obviously that was a big bulk of what we were doing over the last few days. You more than me, admittedly.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, there has been a quandary in the academia sphere as to how to measure masking. It's very hard to quantify. So there have been these various attempts at theories, and one of them is called it's quite dull, but anyway, the discrepancy method, which is using screening devices, screening questionnaires, which you're very familiar with, I know, to highlight a person, an individual, witness and observe and understand their autistic traits, and then find the discrepancy, the difference between those autistic traits and how they present. So, for example, in the diagnostic process. So, you know, when we know that when children are observed, they will do their utmost, usually naturally, instinctively, to do what is expected of the observer. So there is a question mark, and there has been a lot of questioning of this method, because it very much depends on those markers of autism and how autism is perceived, which up until the last decade or so has been deficit-based autism markers of, you know, being unable to give eye contact, being unable to have a two-way conversation, being repetitive in their words, like echolalia, for example, or their behaviors. So that was a challenge for some researchers. And Laura Hull, who co-authored this book, Autism and Masking, she did her own research as well. And she devised a new questionnaire, which is called the Camouflaging Autistic Traits Questionnaire, or CAT. And she found that using that was helpful because it gave a relatively quick synopsis estimate of that person's masking behaviors. And then they were able to compare to the actual person in observing them, say, in a particular environment, in a school environment, for example. That has been helpful. And also in latter years, because of internet and online advocates, more and more autistic adults who have probably had a late diagnosis have been able to reflect element now, this big portion of the autistic community that are able to speak up and out and say, yes, I recognize when I was a child at school, when I was at home in the family situation, when I was at work, I masked certain things. And that is all about self-reporting, which also has its challenges. Yeah. Because a lot of masking is subconscious, instinctive.
Yes.
So, you know, that person might well not be aware of the extent that they're actually masking. I know this rings true for me, that I look back at my teaching career when I was a teacher, and I masked all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is challenging. And also what is equally challenging is alexithymia, which I mentioned last week in our talk, which is the ability to understand and identify emotional states. And we, you know, found out recently that 50% of autistic people are alexithymic, which means that they have great difficulty in recognizing their emotional states, never mind regulating them. And so the stress involved in that over time, if somebody is emotionally dysregulated, builds up to the point of breaking point, you know, meltdown or burnout. And so then the combination of that and the impact on mental health can really impact and mask, ironically, mask the autism.
Yeah.
Because the mental health difficulties take over. And that might be at the point where that person would go to the doctors, to the GP, and the GP would immediately see that somebody is incredibly stressed and anxious, or immediately see the depression traits.
Yeah.
And that could take over and override the underlying autism that perhaps is undiagnosed, well, probably undiagnosed.
So this is a really interesting aspect for me, because this is something that I've believed very much happens in a day-to-day basis across the likes of the NHS, particularly when you think about within CAMS, where they don't naturally screen for autism. And when I was thinking about launching the M word, I was very keen to kind of do the initial screening where you don't fall foul of going down the wrong rabbit hole. You actually think about, how do you show that an autistic person has the very, you know, very normal anxieties, because it's often so often missed because of the masking, because of the fawning. And so what I wanted to show, and it was quite interesting, but I'll just come on to that in a second, but what I wanted to show was, look how easy this is. So I implemented very much the PHQ-9 for looking at depression, but also the GAD-7 for looking at anxiety. But I also added another one, because the anger, interestingly, for those with PDA who have meltdowns, what do you know? They react, don't they, with their anger? It's a meltdown, it's a lash out. And when you start thinking about completing the PHQ-9, it could show quite a high score. But when you have your hunches from the mental health assessment that there are indicators suggesting autism, you know you can't just stop at the end of that and say, well, okay, it's a really high score, therefore you are clinically depressed. But hang on a minute, you know, let's go to the next one, shall we? The GAD-7. And again, you could be forgiven where they could go down the wrong rabbit hole again, going, well, clinical anxiety. Yes, but hang on a minute, there is a bit more, because the indicators have suggested more information. And what I found really interesting was Laura Hell, when she was creating this cat, what did she go back to? She went back to what was known as sound screening tools of which both the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 were both used, but also she was looking at, for example, there is an autism questionnaire that she utilised, but she also went to the wellbeing one run by Warwick Edinburgh screening tool. And that's quite interesting because you're looking at different angles, are you not, to consider all of that.
Well,
but
sorry.
No, you carry on. You carry on.
It's building up a complete picture because we're talking about a human being, and the impact on any individual human being is physical, social, psychological, emotional. So
when I went through the screenings, what I found really interesting was how I've put all that together on the mental health side of things, but also on the other side to look at the autism, the ADHD and the PDA, because they're so vital together to show, don't go down the wrong rabbit hole. Yes, there is going to be elements of low mood, and yes, of course, there's going to be elements of anxiety. But also look more importantly at how they sit together. They can't be separated, because when they are missed, you are going to have low mood, you are going to have anxiety.
Yeah, and also ADHD as well, comorbid more often than not with autism. I think we're finding, you know, the statistics are just going up and up about, you know, the ratio of autism and ADHD, and it is for ADHDers, it's about the suppression again of natural behaviours. I was reflecting on this for myself, and you know, don't get me wrong, in school I was the perfect pupil. I did not get up out of my seat and fidget and swing back on my chair and fiddle with you know, chew pencils, whatever. I masked so well at school, but when I wasn't at school, I realized that you know, I had the need to fidget all the time. And you know, the cinema experience, for example, having to sit still in a cinema for a couple of hours was excruciating for me. And I would find myself fixating on every little itch, every little discomfort in the seat, in my clothing. I would totally destroy my enjoyment of a film because that overrode all my sort of well-being aspects, because I was unable to fidget and because I knew I had to be quiet, which you know, is excruciating for the ADHD in school. And no wonder they end up having a complete meltdown, like you say, the fizzy bottle explosion once they get home, because of all that containment, all that suppression.
So we've got 15 minutes left. How are you going to squeeze in the rest of this information that you've got for us?
Influences. I'm trying to remember what we talked about in terms of influencing. I mean, I guess it is important for me to mention the odd quote. So in my research, I found that there had been a very good, solid, appropriate paper called the Conceptual Analysis of Masking, Autistic Masking, Understanding the Narrative of Stigma by Kieran Rose, who is a very vocal autistic advocate, and his special interest is masking. And he did this paper with Amy Pearson, a doctor in psychology, and he said it is important to recognize how individual characteristics may impact on the perceived visibility of autism across different people, and not conflate this with masking. In other words, you know, there are other characteristics to take into play, such as gender. And the initial research into masking, or also known as camouflaging, was focusing on the female autism phenotype, because girls seemed to slip diagnosis, and the academics understood that. And so there is this element of, if a person is an extrovert, they are more likely to externalize their behaviors. So a person who is introvert on the opposite end of the spectrum is more likely to internalize. So those people would go under the radar for longer, hence not necessarily be picked up upon for autism, especially. And they're more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety. The M-word poll was really interesting, and thank you to everybody who took part.
It was amazing, wasn't it? Such a flurry every day.
What interested me and stuck out for me was the number 72 of parents reporting that their child masked in school, compared to the number of teachers who recognised the masking being 6. And I thought, oh wow, there's a discrepancy for you. And no wonder our children, and some of them are primary. I was expecting the number to be higher for secondary school children, to be honest. But 29 parents saying their children are primary school children, that they are struggling with school to such an extent that perhaps they're not able to attend. And those with autistic traits and or PDA traits or ADHD traits, they were in the 40s respectively, PDA slightly less. And so I just think, it's not surprising really that those numbers are, around the 50% mark, well, more than the 50% mark for those masking in school.
And tell me, because my data that I accrue every day that I'm doing a screening through the M-word, my data suggests it is not predominantly boys and it's not predominantly girls in secondary school. What have you got as the poll? What have you got?
Yeah, it's equal. It's surprisingly equal. So 33 for males and 31 for females. So,
which is really interesting because Laura Hull was suggesting that actually it was higher in boys, and yet I was thinking, I'm reading this going, really? Because actually, is it? There is that question. There is that substantial evidence over 20 years. We've been looking at many journals between us, and it's suggesting that it's always been predominantly boys, when in actual fact, you and I are seeing over and over again through the M-word, not so fast.
Yeah. And also to take into account the non-binary children, of which one parent kindly reported that. And that is a definite influence as well to masking, because there is that element of not feeling safe to be your authentic self. Certainly if you're questioning your sexuality as a teenager, how vulnerable is that for a young person to out themselves, never mind to confidently out themselves. There's two different things. This reminded me of the program, I'll be very brief, Sex Education. I really enjoyed it. It was on Netflix, and I totally binge watched it last year. And it's a perfect program for any parents out there who were brought up on Grange Hill, because it's funny and poignant and moving in equal measure. And so much of that to me highlighted the elements of masking, because you've got the intersectionality of people. You've got those that are afraid to be their true selves. For example, Eric, who's very flamboyantly gay, who's black, who has extrovert qualities, but he's reluctant still to go all out in his flamboyance. Through to Lily, who has a adorable, quirky outlook of the world, and totally passionate and obsessive about aliens, and you know, the most amazing hairdos and makeup, and you know, so creative, and how, you know, she's ridiculed for her creations, which was, you know, one of them was a play, a very outrageous play. I mean, I thought, how PDA is that? But yeah, perfect. But totally ridiculed by a member of the teaching staff, and then becoming depressed because of it. So this highlights the long-term effects. That, you know, no surprise. In a 2019 study, stress and anxiety was found to be higher in those who routinely mask their autistic traits. In a 2018 study, adults were asked to report on their autistic traits, the masking of autistic traits, and they had depression, you know, and felt unaccepted socially, and more often than not were lonely and isolated, which goes hand in hand with depression. In a 2016 study, women frequently reported exhaustion because of the constant effort and hypervigilance required to mask. Also, of course, there's the delay in identifying autism. There is also the appalling loss of identity, which comes with long-term masking and suppression of natural traits, where, you know,
Sue, we've got the last one. We've really got to push it home now. So what would you like to say as creative ways for masking? Because this is a huge one, and I know we're going to have to come back to this, but what have you got for ideas?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's really important for parents out there to not feel total dismay. I know it is despairing to think, you know, how can I best help and support my young person? Ultimately, it's about communication, and it is about finding, exposing where your child might be having difficulties, whether that's at home or at school. It could be, you know, that there's issues with siblings, in which case it's a good opportunity to have a family discussion around how best to minimize distress, and how best to support and recognize when the autistic young person is perhaps in meltdown, and ultimately to work towards preventing it. You know, nobody wants meltdowns to happen, especially the autistic person, because they come at great physical and emotional cost. So it is about trying to consciously be aware of your traits, and of certainly of the stress points, the external, the outside stresses. So if you know that your young person is struggling at school, then when they come in through the door, allowing them to do what they need to do in order to regulate. If that means immediately taking off their uniform and running upstairs to their bedroom, so be it. If that means just sitting in front of the telly and not talking for 2 hours, so be it. So there are these adjustments that can be made. But for teachers, it's no mean feat. And basically it's down to the senior management of schools to encourage autism training and awareness, and to have conversations about masking in a much more open, constructive way, because there's an awful lot of it going on, and to think of effective ways of supporting young people who are showing signs of stress.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, one of the things that is really helpful is thinking about creative journals where you are learning to identify you do things and why you do things, because invariably these snap months, you say don't remember them, but they are very prominent thoughts. Do you remember we were talking earlier in the program about how anxiety is being driven by that need to ensure that you have your social network, otherwise you won't survive on your own, but also that needing to fit in so that you don't stand out, because that creates anxiety in itself. So huge pieces of information that could be put into a very creative journal to kind of start learning about yourself, but also that could be used for discussion with family members. And just very, very quickly, a parent had put there about a phrase, and it's a very good phrase, I don't mind. And that it happens repeatedly. But I think when you realize, hang on a minute, that's masking in some respects. Why don't you mind? Why don't you have an opinion? It's thinking about challenging, why do you not feel safe to be able to say, I would like, and we do it consistently. So it's about being very mindful in the moment of, I do this quite a bit. We've run out of time. So you've been amazing yet again. I think this is certainly something that we can come back to in future episodes, because it's such a big area, isn't it? And maybe just pick again, is it something about fawning that we should look at, or aloofness? We haven't even explored that. There's just so much in it, isn't there? My thanks again to everybody. Sorry, you were going to be very quick. Very quick.
Very quick. It is a case of just saying to the person, how can I make this easier for you?
Yeah.
That's one thing to take home. How can I make this easier for you?
Yeah, nice touch. We will see you again next week, Wednesdays, 12:15. Join us, please. We are having the most interesting explorations and, of course, unearthing more information around mental health and autism. That's it, folks. We're running out of time. Goodbye. See you next week.
Bye.